listening to the Big Blue Marble Podcast with Anwar Knight.
Ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls, for those of you sitting in the first 15 rows, you are in the soak zone. There's a good chance that during our experience today, you'll be getting very, very wet.
It's all put together with precision. The empowering feel-good music, the mechanically driven motion in the water designed to simulate a sea, and huge projection screens that are fastened high above the pool, packaged to make a spectator feel that they are a part of something good here, getting a front row seat to watch the ocean's top predator in action, live at SeaWorld. This marine park first got into orca showbiz way back in 1965. That is when they captured the original Shamu. The story on how they acquired that killer whale is gruesome. Reports suggest her mother was intentionally killed so they can capture the calf and bring her to SeaWorld San Diego, where she was trained to become the park's first performing orca. I wish I could tell you what you were hearing is from a show that occurred a decade ago, but it's not. This is from January 2020. A few years ago, SeaWorld, bowing to public pressure due to the critically acclaimed documentary Blackfish, announced that they would end orca breeding and phase out theatrical-styled orca shows. This latest one is called Orca Encounter, and while it certainly features less tricks and does include educational components, the stars of the attraction remain these amazing sea animals, and they are still, to some extent, required to perform, and do so in a sea pen that is cruelly inadequate.
I want you to turn around in a circle. Go ahead. Spin around like ballerina. There we go. Nice moves.
Some experts believe that it's the shallow depth of the pools that they live in, along with an unnatural exposure of sunlight and water pressure, that is the primary cause of their dorsal fin collapsing. It has been reported that all males in captivity, 100%, experience dorsal fin collapse. Orcas are truly a remarkable and iconic species. They have been roaming the oceans for nearly 6 million years. They thrive on social interaction among their pods. In fact, each family has their own language. In the wild, they are masterful hunters. Using sonar or echolocation, these 5-ton mammals can identify something as small as a coin in the middle of the sea. Instinctive attributes that are stripped away in captivity. There are literally thousands of marine animals that are still being held in captivity in various marine parks across the world. Whales, dolphins, and other creatures. The plight of these animals has been in the spotlight for some time, but action relatively slow. However, a new movement has now been set afloat. One that could help bridge a collaboration between corporate and philanthropic partners. An idea, a sympathetic, suitable solution to help these cetaceans. To build a sanctuary, a place for rescued marine park animals to live. A safe and controlled environment, yet in the natural ocean. No shows, no spotlights, no concrete tanks or glass panels. Just a large open sea space. Yes, it'll still be netted, as most of them have been bred in captivity. They simply could not survive in the wild on their own. The plans for the first of its kind in North America is well underway and is slated to open in late 2022. It's being steered by the Whale Sanctuary Project. Located on the eastern shores of Nova Scotia, it's an ambitious endeavor that could help establish a new relationship, a new beginning on how we treat sea life in the years ahead. Welcome aboard, my friends, and thank you so much for listening in on this, the 25th episode of the Big Blue Marble Podcast. I appreciate your long-standing support. I'm really excited to share this episode with you. It's such a great story. It's such a great Canadian story. My guest who will be joining me today is the Executive Director of the Whale Sanctuary Project. Charles Vinick is a fascinating man. His passion and knowledge of sea life is extraordinary. So let's get to it. Canada's Whale Sanctuary starts now.
the latest stories on our changing planet, plus show updates and an exclusive look behind the scenes with Anwar Knight in studio, visit bigbluemarble.earth.
And a very good day to you, Charles. Thanks for joining us. I have to tell you, I was so absorbed in learning about your journey to the Whale Sanctuary Project, from executive positions at Ocean Future Society, as a producer for Jacques Cousteau Films. You also, of course, led the charge to free Keiko, the killer whale who starred in the Free Willy movie. And those are just a few accolades. But today, executive director of the Whale Sanctuary Project. So I wanted to ask you, is there one particular moment in there that you can recall that you really ignited the passion for marine mammals? Was there a certain encounter in there?
Well, thank you, first of all, Anwar, for speaking with me today. It's a pleasure to be with you, and I thank you. There are a couple of things. One I certainly recall vividly is we were doing filming with Jacques Cousteau. We had Calypso in the waters around Australia. We did 4 hours of television there. And I would often go to Australia in advance of our filming to really do pre-film work. And I was invited to a marine park out on the Gold Coast. And I hadn't really ever been to marine parks at that point. And because I was the Cousteau guy, they invited me backstage with the animals and into the pool with some suit orcas, which are orcas in the southern hemisphere. And the trainers showed me the signals, and I was able to be thrown up into the air by the whales when I gave one signal, and then I actually went on the backs of 2 others and surfed across the pool on the backs of these small whales. And it was a rush. I mean, there's no getting around it. It was really fun. And then it came time for the show, and I went up and I sat in the bleachers and watched the show with the other visitors. And it struck me vividly and poignantly about what had I just done? Mm-hmm. How had I, the person who's representing one of the foremost ecologists in the world, jumped into an artificial pool and done tricks with the whales. Mm-hmm. And that stayed with me forever. And certainly then having the opportunity to manage the project to bring the Free Willy whale Keiko back to Iceland kind of solidified my engagement in this area and my commitment to doing all I can and all we as an organization can to change the way in which we as humans relate to captive animals and particularly to cetaceans.
And that's a part of the evolution of the Whale Sanctuary Project then. So let's begin firstly on what makes the east coast of Canada the perfect spot for this, because I know your team looked at hundreds of possible locations, but indeed it was in the eastern shores there of Nova Scotia. How did that come to be?
Well, Anwar, as you say, we looked at sites in Washington State, in British Columbia, and in Nova Scotia. And we looked at over 130 sites in those areas, mainly initially looking at the physical criteria, the right depth, the right size, the water quality, all the things you would want in terms of the water space to be an ideal location for the whales to live. Then we also needed to find a community that embraces the mission that we're talking about. And so that was even harder because everywhere you have coastal land, it has become valuable. People have built homes, there are marinas, all the kinds of water-related activity that we as humans want. But we're in fact looking for a perfect bay with depth and good water flow and the like, but no homes and no marinas and nothing there. And a community that is just embraces it in every way. And we found that total set of ingredients on the eastern shore of Nova Scotia in an area known as, it's got a number of little communities, Port Hilford, Wine Harbor, Sherbrooke. Those are the communities around it. But we have a very, very special area with terrific water flow and an area that we will enclose with more than 100 acres of water space for the whales, which is more than 150 times the size of the largest tank that any of them live in captivity.
Now, and nothing like this has been done before in regards to, it's still an enclosed area, but as you just mentioned, a very, very large enclosed area, and it's a natural sea. Nothing like this has been done before, though, right?
Well, there are a number of people around the world who are working in this area.
Mm-hmm.
There is a company that has a number of theme parks called Merlin Entertainment, and they bought a park in China some years ago that had 3 beluga whales in it. And they made a commitment to find a place for those whales. One of them died, but 2 were moved to actually the same bay in Iceland where we kept Keiko many years ago. And they are there, but they're moving them in and out of the sanctuary to some land facilities. It's about 8 acres. It's considerably smaller. Right. It's a terrific approach, but it's different. It's not of the size and scope of what we're doing. And in part, the uniqueness of our approach is that this isn't about our whales. This is about creating a place and a relationship with these animals for any that come from marine parks all around the world, where we can welcome them into this space. And so this is a unique approach. It's certainly the first in North America, and one that tremendous set of work, but a tremendous opportunity for the people who are doing it and for the whales who will come.
So how do you go about selecting, first of all, the type of whales that will be calling this sanctuary home? First of all, the species, and secondly, selecting it from or rescuing them from whatever animal park. How does your team determine which would be best suited?
Well, I think our focus is on 2 species, orcas and belugas. And the reason for that is that they suffer more than other cetaceans in captivity. There are more than 3,000 whales and dolphins in captivity. Wow. But there are some 59 orcas, a little more than 300 belugas. And because they are large animals and live in very defined family units, they suffer tremendously from stress and other issues in concrete tanks. They're acoustic animals. All cetaceans are acoustic. Just as we are a visual animal, they are acoustic. So think of living in a concrete environment and your sounds reverberating back at you in ways that are totally unnatural. It would be like you or me living in a mirrored environment, perhaps 10 foot square, and terribly, terribly impactful on their health, on their longevity, and the like. So there's no question that the science now confirms the difficulty these animals have, and that is why we are focusing on these species. Now, it's not the case that we're pointing fingers at marine parks and saying, you're terrible people. On the contrary, if you point your finger at someone, there are always 3 fingers pointing back at you. Rather, what we're saying is, we've evolved, we've changed. We know better today than we did the 40 years ago or more when I was in that park in Australia. And so now that we know, we have a hand out to various parks around the world saying, this is a different approach. Join with us in doing it together. And what I look forward to is when we have cameras above water and below water in a sanctuary, we can beam back to marine parks and to their amphitheaters how whales live in a natural environment and help people, kids particularly, understand whales in nature rather than seeing them perform tricks.
Yeah, there's so many things I want to get into with that answer, but I'm going to backtrack for a second. Let's talk about, first of all, the marine parks that are in the world. And there are many. SeaWorld is probably one of the biggest brand. And they have been around, as you said, actually 50 years, in fact, when the first one opened up. And there likely in there are a few beneficial or stewardship programs that have evolved from them. But at its core, when we look at the habitat when it comes to orcas or maybe beluga whales, it really is cruel. At the end of the day, it really was cruel where they were being kept. And I think the public at large, maybe by choice, we were in the dark. We assumed if we saw the shamus, the caicos, the tillicums performing, that, you know what, they must be okay because they're still doing these shows. They get their treats. And I'm just wondering, is that, why do you think it took so long for it really to come out? Was it because of the documentaries? Was it because of the movie? Why did it take so long for us to say, hey, this isn't right?
Well, I think there are a number of things, and we need to look at it even more broadly than just the whales. Look what's happened with circuses and elephants. We now have sanctuaries for elephants. We have sanctuaries for big cats and for chimpanzees. So there's been a movement on land-based marine mammals, and now that has transitioned certainly to cetaceans. The movie Blackfish has had a major impact on communicating globally about this issue. But also, I think we need to remember, in every one of these parks, the trainers I've met care deeply about the animals. And so in many cases, because there was no other way that they knew of to communicate about the animals' lives, they assumed that this was a good thing to do. But over time, we now have whale watching. People have gotten out into nature. Nature films above water and below water are commonplace. So the education about these animals has expanded massively. And this is very important, the science about the impact on these animals is now clear. There has been scientific study. It proves the stress on these animals impacts their health and shortens their lives. And so I think all of that together has brought about a change that, we refer to as a paradigm shift in how we think about treating these animals.
Yeah. And it should be noted for the record, though, as well, when it impacts the lives of the creatures, it also has impacted the lives of some of those trainers that cared for them. They've been killed, in particular at SeaWorld. Not that, they haven't learned from that, but that is a sad reality, isn't it? That the behavior was so altered, in particular for killer whales, that do I say the term that they went crazy? They went berserk. They lost their mindset. So as a result, they acted out violently.
Well, I think that's anthropomorphizing. That's putting a set of values on what we observed that I don't know that the data supports. Okay. Rather, what we saw was that the whales were, in this case, we're talking about Tillicum, 3 different individuals over that whale's life died in proximity or inside the tank where the whale was. And so the whale could be doing any number of things that are grabbing onto the person, holding them down in a way that is not unnatural in some respects for the whale, but are deadly for the individual and are exacerbated by the environment in which they are. Okay. And we see aggression among whales in a small area because they can't get away from one another in the way they do in a much larger environment. Right. So they're forced to be together. There are also some commercial practices that have been they've been horrendous in the sense of separating mothers and calves at an early age. And the family bond among orcas and their offspring is very, very strong. Orcas live in their birth family their whole lives. Yeah. The males leave the pod to mate, but they come back and stay with their sisters and their mother their whole lives. So that's a family bond that's even stronger than human bonds. And so separating them in any way and breaking up families, as was done when they were captured in the 70s and beyond, and the way they've been sold off in some respects in some of these parks, is truly totally inappropriate and not something anyone should condone.
Well, let me ask you this then, because just in the last week, Marine Land at Niagara Falls in Ontario here, they transported 5 belugas to another park in the U.S., and they say it's the largest beluga park, not in terms of entertainment value, it'll be used for research. But is that really the best move after everything we've learned, we've evolved to this point? Is that the right thing to do? Do we not still have now a further journey to go?
There's no question we have a further journey to go. And in that particular instance, there have been some 50 beluga whales at Marine Land of Canada, more than any other place in the world in terms of a park. So they are overcrowded. They are in difficult circumstances. So in one respect, moving 5 of them from that environment to the Mystic Aquarium where they went is a better environment. It's a step up, but it's still living in a concrete environment. It's still living in an artificial habitat with 3 other beluga whales. So in that context, in my mind, with the respect that I have for some of the work that takes place at Mystic, and they do have a good scientific team, it's still a public display experience. And while they don't do tricks, they are on display. And I think that is not the step we need to take. The step we need to take is to natural seaside environments where the whales have the opportunity to interact with the bottom, the flatfish, the crabs, whatever else is there, have birds flying over the surface, have natural flora and fauna that they interact with. That's their natural environment. Now, in a sanctuary, it's not perfect. As you pointed out, it's still an enclosure, but 100, 150 times larger than where they could be, and as close to a natural habitat as we can possibly provide, and we owe them this. They have made millions of dollars for their owners, if you will, the people who've held them, and they've entertained tens of millions of people. The least we can do is to provide them sanctuary and have them retire in quality of life.
Because they would not be able to be released in the wild, right? They would not be able to survive. They're not used to a wild environment. Is that correct?
Well, more than half the cetaceans in captivity have been born in captivity. All of them have been fed thawed frozen fish. So they don't have the skills to capture fish. Their families are artificial, so they don't have the community in which to live. And so their ability to survive in the wild, except in perhaps very rare and individual cases, would be highly unlikely. So we have to plan on them living in a sanctuary for their lives. And if there's ever an opportunity to consider whether one or more might be a candidate for something more wild, that remains to be seen. But I don't think that can be the objective. We learned this with Keiko, and it's it's easy to capture a whale. It's really difficult to put one back. So the sanctuary is the solution. And this will be a worldwide movement to create sanctuaries, hopefully hand in hand with the marine park industry.
So is the main goal then to integrate a select number of orcas and belugas in this sanctuary in particular, or we don't know that definitively yet?
No, we would never mix species in an environment.
Okay.
They need to be kept separate. Your belugas in an area separately, and it could be nearby. You would have orcas, but they would not be integrated in any way. That would not be an objective. So we're looking initially in the sanctuary in Nova Scotia at belugas, and very frankly, Canada passed in 2019 what was known as Bill S-203. They called it the Free Willy Bill in Parliament to prohibit keeping whales, dolphins in captivity in Canada, prohibiting breeding, and prohibiting exporting or importing except under very rare circumstances like the research that was approved for Mystic. That bill leads the world in many respects. Now stop and think about it. We're now building a sanctuary of more than 100 acres in Nova Scotia, also in Canada. Yeah. Wouldn't it be a wonderful story and a wonderful set of circumstances if some of those belugas at Marineland of Canada could come to a sanctuary in Canada, and we would show the whole cycle of change from a legislative bill to a sanctuary hand in hand with a marine park to demonstrate to the world what's appropriate to do for these animals.
So how do we get those belugas there, though? You know, I was just looking at the reports about moving these belugas to that other park from Marineland. They had a C-130 military aircraft. They use cranes. It is a very, very challenging task because they're big, but they're also delicate. So how does that happen? How would they get a beluga, let's say from some other part of Canada, to move it to the East Coast?
Well, let me use the example of Keiko. Keiko was much larger than a beluga, a 10,000-pound whale. And at that point, we used protocols that are well known. And where have the protocols been developed? They have been developed by marine parks because they have moved these animals among their parks for years. So we have a team that has developed a complete protocol for how you would first evaluate candidate animals. You do a complete health workup. You want to understand everything about the animals. You want to begin to get them used to a new environment with some of the features from that environment brought to where they are now. Then you also want to get them comfortable moving into a sling. And the slings are often heavy canvas and the like. They have cutouts for their pectoral fins, but you want the animal swimming into it, swimming out of it, being very comfortable with that environment, so you're not providing any unnecessary stress in the transport. So you spend time preparing the animals for that and training them and working with them. You can't sedate a whale. They're voluntary breathers, so there's no sedation involved in this. It has to be with people they trust, often with the trainers they're used to being part of that transport. Right. And then certainly, as you describe it, the sling is picked up. They're put into a separate tank of water. If they're going on an airplane, that has to be fresh water. They don't allow salt water for corrosion purposes inside a plane. You keep their skin very moist, often with baby ointment. A&D ointment is what we used on Keiko when we flew him. And then you want to make the transport as quickly as you can do it safely, so they're out of salt water for a limited period of time. C-130s are used often. We used a C-17 because we needed to take off short and land on an island off of Iceland, also a short runway, and needed to air-to-air refuel twice en route in order to make that a 15, 16-hour flight from Oregon to Iceland. So you plan these things. You always have other secondary plans. If you have to land for any reason, you've got a place in mind where you would take the whale. All of that planning is part of the procedure for transport. And having a trained staff, as we already do for those projects, is critically important.
And care is a big part of this project too, because ultimately, although they're in a very large space, they still will have to be literally cared for because that's what they're used to. Tell me a little bit about that. What would the teams need to be doing? I'm assuming not only is it feeding, but it's also medical health-wise. Would that be correct?
It is. We will have full-time 24/7 animal care staff, including a full-time veterinarian, a cetacean vet on staff. We're committing the moment you take responsibility for one whale, you take responsibility for that animal for its life. So this is a major commitment. These are long-lived animals. Orcas in the wild live 60, 80 years. In captivity, often it's half that, but it's still a long time. So when we start, we're committing for decades. So we have a full medical team, an animal care staff. You have a marine operations staff that takes care of the environment and the nets and the like. And it's very important that you provide not only the food, so if we have, let's say, 8 whales in a sanctuary in Nova Scotia, we're buying a ton of frozen fish a week for those animals. We inspect every fish. It's human grade food. Every fish is inspected individually as it's thawed. You provide those to the animals. You also check their teeth because, unfortunately, in captivity, often whales are out of nervousness and the like. They're grinding their teeth on their metal cages, on the sides of the concrete walls. So there's a lot of dentition issues where infections have happened in captivity. You check their teeth. You take blood work on a regular basis to be sure they're not carrying any kind of pathogens or getting any kind of pathogens. So you do some medical work, no invasive work whatsoever, no invasive research, although you can do non-invasive research in a sanctuary area. Could be very interesting about their communication and their social bonding. So all of that's possible. And then you also have to provide enrichment. So you help them use the whole space. So they're not congregating in a small space. You might create ways that there are different feeding stations in different areas. You might create some underwater environments that would be intriguing for them to explore, as well as all the natural environment. So you want it to be a very enriching, rewarding life for them in this sanctuary.
Now, of course, that all comes at a cost, though, doesn't it? It's one thing as a startup cost to get it up and running, but this would be long term, as you said. If everything goes well, they're going to live for many decades, depending on the particular whale you have in there. So who covers that cost? I know you have some sponsors, but going forward, just mentioning the food alone, where is it all going to come from?
Well, our commitment is to do this through philanthropic donation. So as you point out, we have some major donors already, but we are in the process of raising literally millions of dollars to do this. Now that sounds like a lot of money, and it is, but it's less expensive. A sanctuary like ours in Nova Scotia is probably going to cost capital campaign around $15 million and $2 to $2.5 million a year to operate. It's a lot of money. But that's much less money than what a marine park would spend to build one more tank. So we truly need support, and we are getting it from all over the world. We hope that people will go to whalesanctuary.org and learn about what we're doing and join with us and communicate what they think about this project to their friends and neighbors and colleagues around the world. It's a major fundraising effort. But there are, I've been blessed and privileged to be in the nonprofit world virtually all of my adult life. And there are no bad causes. There really aren't. They're all wonderful causes. But the beauty about our human community is that we have the capacity and the compassion to help all of these different causes. And this is one more that's critically important, and we hope people will join us.
Now, I would imagine educational awareness will be a part of this master plan, meaning that whether it's school groups or the public in some manner will be able to visit, the sanctuary. And, there might be educational boards and some talks and that sort of thing. Could it be a revenue stream as well? Would there be an admission charge? We don't know yet.
Well, we will certainly, as part of our master plan, we will build an interpretation center where people can learn about the whales in the sanctuary as well as cetaceans generally. And that's a major part of our educational commitment. No question that will be a part of it. It might not be directly on site. It might be adjacent. We have to work that out with the communities in our area. Realistically, any kind of gate receipts will not be a significant part of the revenue stream that's needed. A, it's not sufficient, and B, that's not the purpose. we are not creating another visitor park. What we're creating is a sanctuary where the welfare and the well-being of the whales is the primary and only priority. At the same time, this is an opportunity to provide education about how whales live in nature, and we will certainly do that in every way with virtual reality, as I mentioned earlier, above and below water cameras. We'll certainly have docents and the ability to have some kind of tours of the area in a very limited way that never interfere with the natural activity of the residents, of the whales who live there.
And of course, another spinoff, though, it would be supporting a local economy, because certainly tourists would love to see this. So Port Hilford and surrounding communities would certainly benefit. That's a win-win. I think that's a good thing. Now, there has been some critics, and not really harsh, because in theory, biologists, researchers, they all think this is a good step forward. But there have been some concerns that even the size of this particular sanctuary, that boredom still may be an issue for the whales. What do you have to say about that?
Well, I think there are a couple of things. One, first, with anything you do where you're creating a large environment, it has an impact on the local community. As you say, this will be an opportunity for jobs. This will be an opportunity for ancillary activity to happen in the area. So it will be an economic benefit, we hope, and we hope people, we're going to hire locals, so these will be local jobs as well. So in that sense, we're responding to that. At the same time, there'll be added traffic from our staff and others. So we're working with the local communities to make sure all of our planning takes into account their concerns. With respect to the whales themselves, yes, it's an environment where if there weren't activity for them, they might, as you say, although it's a human term, they might be bored. So
Sure.
We don't know that. But what we do know is we have to provide enrichment. We have to provide ways in which they explore that environment well. And we monitor their social bonds, because now they will have an opportunity to both interact with animals, but if one wants to get away from a pair or others, they can move away and be on their own. We'll have very different depths in different areas. So there's a variety in the natural environment that in and of itself is enriching. So that is a major part of it. But let's also, in a sense, use common sense. A difference between a concrete, sterile environment that's less than 1% the size of what we're talking about can't possibly compare to the kind of quality of life we can provide in a sanctuary of this nature.
No, and I would agree with you. And as I said, even some of the critics are saying, for the most part, this is, a leap forward without question. But what about the regulatory process? Who ensures that everything remains at a set standard? Has that been determined? Would that be a Canadian agency? Would it be a world body per se? Who would make sure that everything continues to run the way it's supposed to run?
Well, there are a number of steps in the process. The first step is that because all submerged land in Canada, and frankly in most the coastal areas of most countries, is government land. In the case of Canada, they describe it as Crown land. So you lease the Crown land. So we're in the process of the lease application to the Department of Lands and Forestry. And then that process incorporates evaluation of our environmental research and responding to questions from Transport Canada, the Department of Environment, Department of Fisheries and Oceans on the federal level. So every agency certainly looks at what we're doing and evaluates whether we are doing it responsibly and whether we're doing it in a way that's sustainable not only for the whales, but for the environment that we are encompassing with our sanctuary. So that's a piece of it. Now, who sets the standards? Well, I have to say there are not standards. There are standards for zoos and aquariums. There are standards for all kinds of things. We are in the process with people who are also doing this elsewhere in the world. The group in Iceland, the National Aquarium in Baltimore that's looking to do something with their eight dolphins. And so we together are looking at how do you create standards for all of this. And we are, our founder and president, Dr. Lori Marino, who is a neuroscientist. This is a particularly important area for her so that we create standards for what is an authentic sanctuary. So we're in the process of doing just that. And then who's responsible over time? We are responsible. We have to take responsibility just as you would if you were creating a home for our grandparents or our sisters, our wives, our husbands. You take responsibility. That's exactly the same level of responsibility you take for these whales.
And it has to start somewhere. As you said, there is no textbook yet. So this is going to evolve. You have experts looking into it, but there may be things that will change. You realize that you have to tweak it. So I applaud you and your team for that. But let me ask you personally, what would it be to deem a success in your eyes? In the work that you're doing with this, at the end of the day, it's a success because of what?
It's a success when the first whales arrive. That's a success. And then it's demonstrating that all that you and I have discussed over the last 30, 35 minutes is accurate, that we have lived up to the commitment of our vision. And that will be success on one level, but this is much larger than the whales that will come to a sanctuary in Nova Scotia. This is truly about changing the way we as human beings relate to captive cetaceans first, in this case, and captive animals broadly. What we know from the science, what we know from spending time in the wild with them, as I've had the privilege of doing, or anywhere else, they are sentient beings. They have emotions. They have feelings. They are remarkably intellectual in ways we may not even understand. And we have to respect them in every way, just as we respect other people. And this is really not about creating one sanctuary in Nova Scotia. It's about creating sanctuary in the true sense of the meaning of that word for captive whales.
Well, and just in our remaining moment here, do we have a target date? When do you think that day will come where the whales are transported in Port Hilford?
Well, I like to say we want to welcome the first whales before the end of 2022. Now, that's a year and a half away, so that's very close.
Yeah.
But I also say, look, if you don't have a stretch goal, nothing gets done. So with COVID, with the U.S.-Canadian border still closed, I can't get back to Nova Scotia much as I'd like to be there. But so that is a stretch goal, and we have to realize it. But we have to move in every way to do this now. Not do it 5, 6, 10 years from now, but do it now. And we'll continue to have stretch goals. We're looking for the end of 2022, and we'll do everything we can to raise the funds, to follow all the procedures and the regulatory agencies to make a goal like that possible.
And just one last question for the average person, what can they do to help?
The first thing that I hope everyone will do who's listening, and I want to commend you, Anwar, for all that you do with these podcasts and the way you're reaching out to so many people, is that they will share the idea, share the vision and the mission with their friends, their colleagues, and others. Help us spread the word. And also, I have to be honest, I hope they'll come to our website. I hope they'll check us out, and I hope they'll support us financially.
Well, we know that your team is currently about to open up an information center in Sherbrooke, so we wish you all much success on that. And, on a personal note, I look forward to the day when it opens up and we can perhaps do our show live there and update the story and see how it's all come together.
Thank you very much, Anwar. Really appreciate it. And once again, just whalesanctuary.org, and I hope people will come and check out what we're doing.
My guest has been Mr. Charles Vinick, the Executive Director of the Whale Sanctuary Project. Indeed, for more information, you could log online, www.whalesanctuaryproject.org. And just so you know, I've posted some pictures, by the way, on what the sanctuary will likely look like. It's in today's show notes. Very cool stuff. I look forward to following updates on this project. And just before we wrap up, if you enjoyed this show, please let me know. We are always open to your comments and questions, whether it's good or bad. And we ask that you please subscribe to the podcast and tell your friends about it. You can also follow me on Twitter and Instagram and connect with me there at Anwar Knight, also on my Facebook page at Anwar Knight TV. And be sure to sign up for our free newsletter. We have readers now around the world. Again, the newsletter is absolutely free. It's delivered to your inbox each month. And we highlight unique stories about our changing planet. And, this month's edition, which already has gone out, but one of my favorite stories was on how scientists have trained honeybees to detect COVID. They've trained them to stick out their tongues when they smell the virus. It's just amazing. Again, you can sign up at bigbluemarble.earth. Thanks so much for listening. I'm Anwar Knight, wishing you a great day on the Big Blue Marble.